In the previous episode, we saw how specific traits make humans unique among the living forms on planet Earth. But if we observe humans at the DNA and microscopic levels, what differences do we find compared to their closest relatives, the apes?
The difference between us and apes is minimal, just a few percentage points, 5% at most if we want to be particularly generous. Within this 5% difference, from a phenotypic, morphological, functional, structural, physiological point of view, and so on, there are enormous differences. And so, in fact, it has always been one of the main concerns of genome researchers, of genomists, to try to understand what genetic determinants make a man and an ape. Researchers' attention has shifted to another part of the genome, known as junk DNA. It is perhaps there that, from a molecular point of view, we might find the genetic basis for the differences that exist between humans and apes. In particular, most of the differences at the DNA level between humans and apes fall precisely in the non-coding portion of the genome. The non-coding portion of the genome is that part of the DNA which does not contain information to produce proteins. And why is it so important? First of all, because many of the differences that were being looked for between humans and apes might be found there. Numerous studies suggest this, but there's more. Because it's true that most of the protein coding genes in our species are shared with apes. From a protein perspective, there seems to be little difference, but that's not actually true. Because if we look at how the same genes in humans and apes are turned on and off, that is how they are expressed during the embryonic development of our species. Compared to the embryonic development of apes, we realize that the real differences lie there. There we see the most obvious differences, the most striking differences, above all, during the development of the brain. That is, in other words, the same genes that the ape has are also present in our species. But we activate them, we make them work. Let's put it this way, in a different way, in a more specific way, right at the brain level during its development. Also in adults, but especially during its development. And what is it that specifically turns genes on or off? It's precisely this non-coding portion of the genome. Most likely the explanations for our humanity are found there in this non-coding portion, which makes the coding portion work in a way that's specific to Homo sapiens.
The key to the differences between humans and apes, the peculiarities that make humans unique in their kind, could lie in that non-coding portion of DNA. So was it the evolutionary process that, through selection, favored all those advantageous traits that made humans a highly specialized species?
We, as a species, are the least specialized in nature. We are not skilled runners, precisely because we are bipeds. So bipedalism works very much in our favor. We are not skilled swimmers. We are no longer climbers. We used to be when we were arboreal. We are not great jumpers either. We don't have claws, we don't have jaws, and we don't even have such tough skin like, elephants or rhinoceroses do. We don't have any particular specialization that could serve as a biological arsenal against nature, a nature that hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago tried to kill us in every possible way. But we do have this brain.
Evolutionary processes, while they deprived us of all those specialized traits typical of other species, on the other hand, gave us a brain that is unique in the animal kingdom. A brain capable of understanding the world around us, but above all, capable of adapting the surrounding environment to our needs and requirements. 200,000 years ago, it was the development of the brain that was the key to the success of human evolution.
Our brain as an organ is not, it's not genetically set up to make us intelligent creatures. More intelligent than the rest of the animal world. It's not like that. It's as if it were hardware. It's like buying a supercomputer, but when we turn it on, there's no operating system, so we can't use it. Genetically speaking, an operating system is activated in our brain, but it's very basic, very fundamental. It doesn't really set us apart from the rest of the animal world. So when is it that we become so intelligent? This depends on the stimuli that the infant receives in the very first years of life. That's when the central nervous system, especially the cortex, truly remodels. What are these stimuli? Let's say there are two types. A more basic stimulus, in fact, is the constant contact with the mother's scent, which leads to the establishment of certain connections between neurons and the death of other neurons. All the neural circuits that are not used die, and the neurons die as well. But then there is another level of this kind of input which shapes and sculpts the brain, which is the talking to the infant, having them play games with colors, with objects, bringing them into the three-dimensional world, reading something to them, getting them used to listening, helping them to speak. All these stimuli, which might seem rather trivial to us when they are absent, have a devastating effect on the development of the central nervous system. After the first 2 years of life, the connections between one neuron and another become stabilized. When the circuits are not used, when are they not used? When there is a lack of stimuli. These interneuronal connections die and the neurons also die. This kind of phenomenon it can be seen even more starkly in what are called feral children. That is, those children who, for a variety of reasons, were raised as infants by animals. So in that case, the stimulus that these infants are exposed to is, let's say, animal-like, and clearly the level of stimulation is very low. And their central nervous system develops in a very primitive way. Now, what does all this mean? Today, all of this seems very obvious, very clear to us. It's the basis of pedagogy, these things I've told you. But hundreds of thousands of years ago, what kind of culturally rich stimuli could parents provide to children, assuming that parents even took care of their children? So especially the mother, just as mothers do today.
Thank you. One of the most famous cases of a feral child is that of Senecher, a boy who was raised by wolves and was discovered by some hunters in a cave in Bulandshahr, India. At about the age of 7, he was found living in a wild state and was taken to an orphanage. When he arrived, Senecher walked on all fours, ate raw meat, and made sounds similar to those of wolves. Despite the care and efforts made by the educators, Senecher never learned to speak and lived with a severe cognitive delay that deeply affected him throughout his life.
So our brain is the organ that generated culture, but in order to function, it needs cultural stimuli, a sort of loop. But for us, when was culture born? It's very difficult to answer this question. Some estimate it to be around 40 to 50,000 years ago. Okay, before that, I imagine these first representatives of our species 200,000 years ago, 300,000 years ago, if we want to go a bit further back. And it's true that they had these big heads, but they didn't have how can I say, it was in they had very basic software, so they couldn't use it. Not only could they not use it, but it also gave them an aptitude and an intelligence that is certainly not high performing. But what's even stranger, if we want to look at it on a global level, it's as if nature, hundreds of thousands of years ago, had positively selected an organ that caused us a lot of problems. See the discussions we had earlier, but that we would only use to its full potential hundreds of thousands of years later. And from an evolutionary point of view, this is a very strange thing because nature is very pragmatic in its ways. It prefers the egg today, the chicken tomorrow. Nature doesn't plan, especially it doesn't plan when the organ in question actually increases your risk of death. This is a really curious aspect. Even in this case, we can talk about sexual selection. So we have to imagine that our ancient ancestors preferred to mate with people who had this big head, even though these people weren't particularly more intelligent than others, and even have children who might never be born, precisely because of this incompatibility between the pelvis and the head.
If the brain wasn't the decisive weapon that allowed primitive humans to prevail over other species, why did natural selection favor the development of a sophisticated cognitive system at the expense of everything else? The answer to this question opens up new scenarios, but we will talk about it in detail in the next episode.